This episode is made possible by our generous patrons.
Welcome to the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book
and then see the movie.
I'm James.
And I'm Luke.
And this week we cover Ridley Scott's 2015 film, The Martian. So we read the book, and we've watched the film now, The Martian. You've seen it before, but what was your viewing like this time?
So I think this is my third time seeing it, and this was my first time seeing the extended edition, which I'm pretty sure I could pick out what scenes were added. It was just like small stuff. Added a little bit of texture to the movie a little bit. But I was thinking about it, and extended editions seem to me like they're made for book fans, right? Whenever it's an extended edition of a book movie, book to movie. So I always feel like if we have the option to watch an extended version, we should, just because there's going to be like little things in there that maybe were like included just to please book fans. Right. I don't know how much that was really this extended version, but I mean, definitely like Lord of the Rings and stuff, that is the case. So whenever I find an extended version for a movie that we're going to cover, I'm going to try and watch it, I think.
Well, and it's funny that you mention extended editions because Ridley Scott is just like notorious for having extended editions for his films, and like with the case of like Kingdom of Heaven, that film is so different when you watch the extended edition because it was like panned by critics, the theatrical release was, and then you see the extended edition and you realize the vision that Ridley had and what he actually wanted to put on screen, and totally different movie, completely different experience.
That's been on my list for a while because I saw the original and was like, it was okay. And then so many people have told me that about the extended version. Like, I need to just sit down and watch it one of these days.
Mm-hmm. So I mean, this has an extended edition, and then we talked in our Blade Runner coverage way back, all the different cuts that Blade Runner has. You know, the director's cut and the complete edition and all that other stuff. Yeah. So.
Momentary tangent. Have you read that Denis Villeneuve has talked about a 4-hour edition of Blade Runner 2049 out there? And
yeah, I heard him say he's never going to release it though. It's never coming out.
Yeah. Well, never say never.
Yeah. I mean, I would watch it too.
I'm one of those weirdos. Like, I'd watch it. I like that movie enough. But yeah, let's get back to it.
Obviously, things are cut to make it more appealing to a general audience most of the time. Yeah. And so, but this film, it's interesting because I feel like the extended edition really didn't change it very much at all for me.
No, not really. It and I could see a lot of reasons why they would cut it. To me, it was like a lot of the decisions were made just to keep pacing tight, keep things moving, stuff that kind of distracts from like the overall suspense of a certain thing. There's every now and then where there'd be a scene where I'd be like, yeah, this was definitely not in the original because it totally kind of is beside the point of what's going on right now.
Yeah, and I mean, as a director too, you have to think like every time you cut from Watney back to NASA, you're killing any sort of like running tension that you had, and you have to reset that up as soon as you go back to Watney again. So it's like I can see why like maybe cutting back and forth between them however many scenes were added, like 4 or 5 less times could maybe keep you more invested in what was going on with Watney on Mars, and also more invested in what was going on with NASA because it's not quite as back and forth.
It does feel like I'm someone who appreciates movies that do progress at a stately pace if I'm enjoying it, and I think the benefit of some of these extended editions is they can really add, just like fill in the world and fill in some of the cracks of the story and make it feel like a more completed thing, whereas sometimes the theatrical cut is very targeted. It gets in and gets out, and it kind of feels that way. Like there's no real time for it to breathe, and so sometimes the extended edition, I think, can be nice for that reason. I think that's what it did for this particular movie. It felt like this story had a little bit more time to breathe. It had a little bit more going on than just the main plot at times, and I don't know. We're going to have to talk about some of these scenes, I guess, as we come to them, since we've talked about them so much here vaguely.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you, just since we're kind of talking generally about the film, yeah. I felt that there was this really interesting thing that happened with the film here. We talked about in our book coverage how we felt like we weren't really getting a proper main character introspective point of view. And I think Ridley did something interesting where I think we almost get more of Mark Watney's struggles and more of his like inner turmoil and the things that he's going through in the film than we even do in the book.
Absolutely. I think that's, to me, the major thing that shines about this movie. The thing that and this was my reaction when I first saw it too, because this was something I originally, that was one of my only like minor criticisms of the book, was I felt like I wanted a little bit more of that, and I definitely got it in the movie. And a lot of it's very subtle, because a lot of it's just what you can see on, Matt Damon's face.
Right.
So the acting that he's doing in a lot of these scenes. And then because we're not limited to the logs, we're seeing stuff play out in real time. We can see like emotional reactions to things as it happens, which kind of brings like an immediacy to a lot of those emotional reactions. And yeah, I agree. And a lot of those introspective moments. Well, and one that stood out to me is when he talks about how he likes to go sit out and stare at the vast horizons.
Because he can.
Because he can.
Yeah.
I don't think that was something from the book. And that feels subtly different to me from the Mark Watney in the book, because that feels like a more introspective person.
Right.
I don't know, or more reflective, more contemplative, whatever adjective you want to use there. I liked that. I think that added a little bit of something that I was kind of missing in the book, as much as I love the book, and I do. I like that part of the movie for sure.
In the book, we get descriptions of Mars, tons of descriptions of Mars, but there's something about these like sprawling, like almost like satellite view shots of like the craters and everything on Mars that we get, that really does like a great job of like establishing how isolated he is, how scary the planet is, how, I don't know, and they're also just beautiful shots, and it was just cool to see like them render that and bring that to life. And I think that made for because if we didn't get those, I feel like we would have felt so much more contained. Like we would have felt as claustrophobic as Mark does, because he constantly is in a suit. He's in a rover. He can never really be free. And so I felt like those were like our moments to kind of breathe and like look around and feel like we could relax.
Yeah. Well, and I think it also highlights how alone he is. And I like, in your mind when you're reading the book, okay, he's alone on this planet, but there's something about seeing those vast expanses and seeing kind of those like space shots and knowing how far away Mars is from Earth and how long of a journey it is. And then yeah, just the idea of being the only human being on an entire planet is kind of like, it's so hard to imagine.
Yeah, and I love the moments where he's like, everywhere I go, I'm the first. Everything I do, I'm the first one to be here. I'm the first person. Yeah. I'm the first person to ever be alone on a planet.
And that's right out of the book, those lines. Yeah.
Yeah, and I love that stuff. I want to talk about, I think this kind of goes well into our Ridley Scott discussion, kind of talking about the director. I think that Ridley really did a great job of capturing that. What we talked about in the book was that spirit, the unity, coming together for a common goal or cause. And like there's some of those shots where we see like Times Square when everybody's waiting for the launch, and I think those shots really did a great job of conveying exactly who was invested in it. You know what I mean? Everyone around the world, the most people of all time were watching this.
Yeah, I'm always a sucker for those shots, those big crowd shots. And I know in the back of my mind that they probably just They probably just recorded people watching like a big sporting event or something, to get those reactions. But it always, it does get you in a certain way. Like, I don't know, there's a certain communal, because there are moments like that, right, that we've all been a part of, where there was some huge event and we remember watching it on the news or whatever and seeing everybody react. And I don't know, there's something fun about that. And I totally agree. I think it does. It's one of those, it's kind of a trope in certain kinds of movies, but it's also one of those tropes that I like because it works for me.
Yeah, there's like the trope of like the space mission, right? Like the mission control, and like everybody's so tense, and then when they finally pull it off, everybody cheers and stuff.
Well, that at least definitely has a basis in real life.
Oh, absolutely. That's what I was going to say.
Every time there's a real one, like that really happens.
Yeah, and I think that's so cool too, because that is like that like pure expression of joy and that actually Chiwetel Ejiofor, who plays Vincent Kapoor in this movie, who absolutely, like, Chiwetel Ejiofor absolutely killed it. He actually got to spend some time with like the European Space Agency basically, and he was there around the time that they like did a soft landing on a comet, which was like the first time of ever. And he was there to see like how tense this guy was, and he kind of like based his performance around that, like how tense he was and how like he was handling the situation. Just flipping that switch when it was successful, and just like the guy screaming and just losing his mind.
Yeah, and I mean this was talked about in the book some too, but you also get to see the flip side of that, of what those rooms are like when things go wrong, right?
Yeah,
and I think that's also really cool because that definitely happens too, and sometimes those rockets explode. And it's always really bad. You know, and so many people work so hard on it, so much money, and and that was a detail from the book, the whole lock the doors thing. Apparently, that's something that they say, but I don't think it actually means like lock the doors, no one's allowed in or out. I don't think that's what it means, but it's just something they say. I guess it's like
I think it's like press, like no press. Nobody's like, we need to figure this out before we tell.
Don't let press in. Yeah, right. You're probably right. Yeah.
So one other thing that I just have to mention because I love this guy to death, President Barack Obama named this as his favorite film of 2015.
Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah. So I just like wanted to shout that out. It's pretty cool. And I can totally see it too, because it's like, if you're a president and you're, like think about like the spirit of people that you believe in.
Yeah. It's nationalism done right? It's America being a leader in a international community and working together with allies to achieve something great. And I think that's what you want to see. Speaking of, so there was something else about Andy Weir that I wanted to bring up in this episode, since I forgot to mention it last time. And I may have told you this story, I don't know. But during filming, they wanted to fly him out to different places. They were shooting in the desert, I think, and you probably know better than I do.
Yeah, the location is Wadi Rum, Jordan.
Okay, yeah.
So it's like a desert location.
Yeah, deserts. Yeah, and so they wanted to fly him out onto the set and everything, and he didn't do it because he's deathly afraid of flying.
Really?
Yeah, he has like a severe phobia of flying.
Wow.
Which is pretty interesting. And it was but I read. I'm pretty sure this is based off a memory of something I read a while ago, but I'm pretty sure he did go to the premiere. And the only reason he was able to do it was he did months of therapy and like working through it and all this stuff to where he could get on a plane and fly to the premiere.
That's wild. I watched an interview, somebody else I love, Adam Savage from Mythbusters. He did an interview with Weir, and I was listening to some of that. And I just could not believe, like, Andy Weir was pulling facts and like details and like exact like specifications and like technical knowledge of like velocities and like how the like it was unbelievable. He was pulling it off of the top of his head, and he was just talking about how he loves to just think about. He would just like, the reason that this book was conceived was just he was just sitting by himself just thinking about how you could do a Mars mission with current technology.
Yeah, man. I think I've seen that same interview. It was really cool. And I was listening back to our episode from last week, and that's one of the things that I felt like we didn't do a good enough job underlining, because I think we gave a little bit too much credit to the idea that he was getting all this input from experts and getting all this input from his community and all this stuff. Mm-hmm. But like, no, this guy knows his shit.
It's crazy.
And NASA has like brought him on to talk to him and like consult with him about things. Like he knows his shit and has been recognized for it, after this movie.
It's also crazy because like that's not originally his like background or industry. Like he just loves that stuff. But it's really interesting to hear that he's afraid of rocket / legit, even just plane travel.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where I feel like he probably knows too much, like he knows all the points of failure that are possible and all this stuff, to where sometimes like ignorance can be bliss with stuff like that, right? Mm-hmm. And when you understand how things work so well, like I can see like being more afraid of it because you can know what can go wrong. It's like you hear about medical students with this all the time. When they get a cold, they think they're like going to die because they've learned about all these other crazy diseases that present in much the same way. And so I think like if you really understand how a plane works and like really, really down to that level, like it might be one of those things where like every little tremor, you might think, oh, that's actually this crazy thing happening that I read about this one time, and now we're going to die. And I can see it kind of freaking you out.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I wonder if it's something like that, or I don't know. Maybe it's just one of those things where like anybody can have a phobia too. So who knows? I wonder if that led him to want to learn about that kind of stuff though. Cause there is also something to be said for like being afraid of something and then having it kind of interest you as well. Like you want to learn about it.
You like write what you know, right? So like, what is he afraid of? He's afraid of that kind of traveling. So you just like exponentially increase that, and then like he like what would be his worst nightmare? Being trapped on Mars by himself, you know?
Yeah.
And then you write
yeah,
that.
and maybe that's like greater respect for people who do it all the time because you're so afraid of it. You're like it's interesting to you that people can do it all the time.
So let's jump into some Ridley Scott stuff. I'm gonna go through some of his bio.
So this is our second Ridley Scott movie. We did Blade Runner,
Right?
But that was a long time ago, and I don't know how much we actually talked about him as a filmmaker specifically, as much or just in regards to Blade Runner.
I know that we mentioned like movies that he had directed and been a part of, but I'm just gonna like give kind of like where he's at this time in his life, as well as like kind of where he came from.
Yeah, because this movie was made 30 years later
right.
than the Blade Runner, so that's a big jump.
I mean, the guy's like about to turn 82 right now.
Wow, I did not know he was that old.
Yeah,
that's pretty wild.
Yeah, so I mean, he didn't really like. Let's get into it here. Sir Ridley Scott, he has been knighted. He has been described by film producer Michael Dealey as the very best eye in the business. Director Ridley Scott was born on November 30th, 1937 in South Shields, Tyne and Weir. He went to West Hartlepool College of Art and then London's Royal College of Art, where he helped found the film department there. In 1962, he joined the BBC as a trainee set designer, working on several high-profile series. He attended a trainee director's course while he was there, and his first directing job was on an episode of the popular BBC police series Z-Cars in 1962. So, I mean, even right there, he's like...
It's like 30.
Yeah, he's close to 30. He's like 25 or so, right?
Oh, yeah, wow. Yeah, you're right, 'cause 37, you said.
Yeah. So...
25, he's directing. It's incredible.
More TV work followed until, frustrated by poor financial rewards at the BBC, he went into advertising. With his younger brother, Tony Scott, he formed the advertising production company RSA, Ridley Scott Associates, in 1967 and spent the next 10 years making some of the best-known and best-loved TV adverts ever shown on British television. He began working with producer David Putnam in the 1970s, developing ideas for feature films. Their first joint endeavor, The Duelist, in 1977, won the jury prize for Best First Work at Cannes in 1977 and was nominated for the Palme d'Or, more than successfully launching Scott's feature film career. The success of Star Wars in 1977 inspired Scott's interest in making science fiction, and he accepted the offer to direct Dan O'Bannon's low-budget science fiction horror movie Alien in 1979, a critical and commercial success that firmly established his worldwide reputation as a movie director. Alien is like one of my favorite movies ever. And it holds up to this day in almost every way, and like so much of not only horror but sci-fi can draw roots to that film. He would then go on to make films such as Blade Runner, Thelma and Louise, Gladiator, and Black Hawk Down. He was awarded Knight Bachelor of the Order of the British Empire in 2003 at Queen's New Year's Honours for his substantial contribution to the British film industry. So I say all of that because we know how prolific Ridley Scott is. And, not every director can have every single one of their films be perfect. And, people, I don't know if you've seen like Exodus, Gods and Kings, but like that's an example of a Ridley Scott movie that I would just say pass on. But
yeah, I heard that.
The guy is incredible. He's just like such a prolific filmmaker. And the reason that I wanted to get that background is to express to you where he was at in 2015 and 2014 when he was developing the movie. So his brother Tony Scott, he had been working with him for a really long time, as I talked about, and he tragically committed suicide in, I believe, 2013.
Wow.
2012 or 2013, and I think that affected Ridley Scott, and all of this is kind of just like, this isn't his words. This is what people have drawn from it, and kind of what I saw in my research is, your brother commits suicide, and like the isolation of losing your brother and feeling like there's no one there, and just kind of like this film coming around the same time, people felt like being able to be in that headspace, and like, there's no way that it didn't trickle into the work in some way. And I think he himself said that his favorite part of the movie is that so all of that was kind of just like from my research, people are saying that the death of Tony Scott really affected Ridley and it had a certain effect on this film because of that. And, you could say that's bullshit, and I would, who really knows is what I'm trying to say. But knows? I think that you can definitely see a little bit of it if you wanted to dig. The thing that he has said, though, is his favorite part of the film is that no one is ever truly alone. So although Mark Watney was alone on this planet, millions of people wanted to get him home. Thousands of people were working around the clock to get him home. And then, just the people that were watching and following along and hoping that he would make it back. And I think that that's also like really nice to think about, the idea that even if someone leaves you, they're still there, and memories and that kind of stuff.
Sure. Yeah, I like that.
All right, and then so we have to talk about this, because this is probably one of the things that stands out to me the most about this film. Is this is one of the most unbelievable casts that I've seen in a movie in such a long time.
Oh yeah,
it's
especially now.
Yeah, it's an embarrassment of riches. It's unbelievable, the people who are in this movie, just mind blowing. Jessica Chastain, Michael Pena, Kristen Wiig, Jeff Daniels, Sean Bean, Matt Damon, Kate Mara, Sebastian Stan, Chiwetel Ejiofor, Benedict Wong, Mackenzie Davis, and Donald Glover.
Yeah, which, I mean, a lot of those people have gone on to become even bigger stars than they were at the time. But even at the time, they were well known. Yeah, truly, this really incredible cast, and it's amazing when you go back to NASA. I think is where it really kind of stands out, because we've had the crew, which you have Jessica Chastain in there, and then a few other familiar faces, and you're like, okay, and is it the winners? Bucky Brooks is in there.
Mm-hmm. Bucky
but
Barnes.
He hadn't been yet. Was it Barnes?
Bucky Barnes. Yeah.
Oh man, you must be like.
No, it's fine. It happens.
Yeah, I'm not the Marvel guy on this podcast. Clearly. But I was like, oh, that's him. I actually didn't recognize him for a while in the movie.
Yeah.
It took me a while before I was like, oh, that's the same guy.
Right.
Because he looks a lot different. Like he clearly got he worked out a ton
Yeah.
for that role and kind of changed how he looks.
I wasn't going to bring it up, but you brought it up, dude. You brought up the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So let's talk about that real quick. In terms of these actors, Michael Pena was in Ant-Man.
Yeah. Ant-Man, yeah.
Matt Damon, it was in Thor Ragnarok. He was like a fake Loki in like a play. He was like a cameo role.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Sebastian Stan, Winter Soldier. Chiwetel Ejiofor is Mordo in Doctor Strange. Benedict Wong is Wong in Doctor Strange as well. And then Donald Glover was in Homecoming.
I did not realize that was who that is. That totally makes sense.
Yeah.
I like that role in Doctor Strange, but this role, I love him in this movie.
He's so good, dude. Anything he's in, dude, he always kills it, knocks it out of the park.
Yeah, he's so funny.
And then, of course, I have to talk about my boy, Donald Glover, who I've loved for a very long time.
Yeah.
You can't even... It's crazy, man. He's like the all-around artist. He's a comedian, he's an actor, singer, songwriter, producer, director. I can remember seeing like old school YouTube videos of him back in the day, and then he just rose to prominence and kept coming up, and he was in Community. I watched him in Community, which, speaking of Community, if there's any Community fans out there, I had this thing when I was watching this movie where I felt like Donald Glover plays Troy in Community, but in this film it felt like he was channeling Danny Pudi's Abed. He felt like he was doing kind of an Abed-esque thing. So let me know if you agree with that.
I have no idea what any of that means, but
it's funny because it's just this very eccentric character, and Troy in Community is kind of a jock who's got a sensitive side, but it's just funny to see him play the eccentric role. And yeah, I mean, the guy's absolutely blowing up. Obviously, he's everywhere right now, but he's just the best. And dude, I talked about Chiwetel Ejiofor, amazing. Jessica Chastain as the commander, unbelievable, dude. She's so good.
We're gonna be seeing her in It Part 2 this year.
Yeah, I'm excited about that. That'll be cool.
As Bev Marsh.
Yeah.
That's gonna be cool.
But all right, we finally come to the thing that it was probably my favorite part about the entire movie. Sean Bean is in this movie, and I think we should address the Council of Elrond here at the top. Because when I saw this in theaters, I remember being just absolutely thunderstruck, just dumbfounded, and I couldn't believe that it was happening.
And it feels like it was written for him, right?
But it was in the book.
Yeah, I know. That's what's incredible about it. Because I think a lot of people who see the movie and don't read the book thought it was written because it's Sean Bean. They're like, oh, they put this in there for him so that he'd have this moment on the screen,
Right.
But it really wasn't. He just happened to be cast in that role.
It's so funny, and I love all of it. There's a little reference that gets dropped that I didn't even understand, and being a huge Tolkien fan, I didn't even understand. the reference, but I wrote it down here. Hold on. During the Council of Elrond discussion, Teddy Sanders states that he wants to be called Glorfindel. While many people assumed he was making a joke by creating a silly, vaguely elvish-sounding name, there's actually a minor character from the Lord of the Rings novels named Glorfindel, who is responsible for transporting Frodo on the last leg of the flight to Rivendell, the role performed by Arwen in the film, and later participates in the council as one of Elrond's chief advisors. His name means golden hair, and actor Jeff Daniels has blonde hair.
Yeah, I love that. It's like a deep book cut, which I remember when we covered Fellowship last year. Glorfindel, I remember showing up and taking Frodo, and yeah, we talked about how that got changed to Arwen in the movie.
I remember somebody besides Arwen, but I could not pull the name if if you had a gun to my head. But yeah, it's so funny, such a good moment, and the fact that like Sean Bean is describing the Council of Elrond, I was just like, I can't take this.
That's so good.
Boromir.
Oh, and just shout out to Mackenzie Davis, who, if you've ever seen *Halt and Catch Fire*, or she was also in *Blade Runner 2049*. She's been in a few things recently. Dude, I think she's great.
Shout out to her in San Junipero, the San Junipero episode of Black Mirror. Have you seen that?
Oh, I haven't seen that one yet.
Oh my god, man!
Got to see it. I need to watch more Black Mirror.
Such one of my favorite Black Mirror episodes, easily.
Yeah. So something funny I saw on Twitter around the time this movie came out was I think it was a scientist who tweeted this, but I'm not sure. But it was like the most ridiculous or the most science fiction part of The Martian is the well-funded NASA or something like that. Like NASA's so well-funded, like when you see the grounds of it when they arrive.
Yeah, Caitlin mentioned that too. Like she was like, look how fucking like futuristic and everything the entranceways and everything is, and like they're like so well-funded.
Yeah. That was the thing that they saw and were like, that's pure science fiction.
That's so funny. Just a couple other little production things here. Matt Damon was willing to lose a ton of weight for the film, when he gets very skinny, malnourished. But Ridley Scott forbade it. He was like, I'm not allowing you to do that, because I guess he's against that kind of thing because it's so unhealthy. And so they went with a body double instead.
Yeah, which I think is obvious. Unfortunately, but
it's still well done in camp. Like I think they did a pretty good job of the blending.
Well, I guess
stuff.
it's just maybe if you're someone like me who like knows what to look for.
Right. I mean, it's clearly, but it's like it's old Hollywood kind of stuff, like Smoke and Mirrors, and like they make it look pretty good, I think. But it's clearly not Matt Damon. Yeah. Yeah,
and then when you see him with his shirt off and it's like chest up, you can tell that he's still.
Well, it's like broad,
the guy you just saw was very narrow.
Exactly. To go back to the Marvel Cinematic Universe real quick, think about like Captain America before the super serum.
Yeah.
Like super soldier serum. Like he's like, it's so wonky looking.
Yeah.
So Ridley Scott claimed that one of the most difficult scenes to direct was to explain to the audience the hexadecimal system Watney uses to communicate with Earth, which Scott admitted was hard for himself to understand at first.
Yeah, and I don't think they really explain it that well.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think you walk away from the movie understanding it as much as you go, okay.
Yeah, you just say, like, okay, they know what they're doing, and I'm going to assume that they can figure it out.
Yeah. The book really attempts to explain it, and once again, I felt like in the moment I read it, I was like, yeah, I think I kind of get what they're saying, and then, like, right after I finished that chapter, I immediately forgot it.
Oh, yeah, no, I couldn't explain it to you at all right now. The Steely-Eyed Missile Man... as a reference. Do you know about this story?
No, let's hear it.
Very interesting, because we talked last week about Apollo 11 and Apollo 13 a little bit. The Steely-Eyed Missile Man is a reference to flight controller John Aaron's actions following 2 lightning strikes to the Apollo 12 rocket in its first minute after liftoff. The electrical surge caused numerous problems in the telemetry system of the craft, which, if unresolved, would force a mission abort. Aaron recognized the telemetry problem as similar to one he'd seen in testing a year before, and advised the crew to switch the signal conditioning electronics system to the auxiliary position. This control was so obscure that neither the capsule commander nor the mission commander knew what or even where it was, but pilot Alan Bean did. Following Aaron's advice, altering the setting immediately fixed the problem, allowing the mission to continue. Aaron's quick, calm, and effective response to the crisis earned him the appellation widely considered to be the highest praise possible within NASA.
Really?
Yeah.
That's cool, man. That's a deep cut reference. I didn't get that. That's so cool.
Crazy, right? And we were talking about like how they constantly solve problems. Like everything goes wrong and then they just figure it out.
It's wild.
So this is more technical filmmaking stuff, but I think this is interesting. The exterior Martian scenes were shot at a slower speed to simulate Mars' gravity, which is 38% of Earth's gravity. Therefore, anything on the surface of Mars needed to appear lighter and have a slight bounce to it. However, the frame rate that was desired would not allow the cameras to run in sync. To negate this, the film was shot at 48 frames per second during exterior scenes, which was then sped up to the standard 24 frames per second. This meant that most of the audio had to be re-recorded in post. As a result of this, syncing up audio with Mark's lips filmed at a slower rate would have been impossible. Ridley Scott chose to have Mark narrate the scenes instead of having him talk in the suit to avoid this problem.
And this is one of the biggest issues with any space movie is gravity and how to make it believable and make it look right. And honestly, I was like, why didn't they mention the whole gravity thing to lampshade it? But then it was like, once you call attention to it, then everybody's going to be looking. Whereas if you don't say anything, then maybe people, because when he's in the hab and stuff, like it's very clearly Earth gravity in there. This is the same issue that comes up in, have you ever seen the movie Moon?
Right.
Which is a great movie.
Yeah.
Like I love that movie.
Oh, love it.
But when he's in the base, he's on Earth gravity. it's very obvious, and that's even more egregious because moon gravity is like 17%.
Right.
Earth gravity.
Yeah. It's true. I didn't even think about that, honestly. Yeah, they got me with the old Hollywood. Don't say anything about it.
Yeah, but just don't say anything about it, and you don't think about it.
All right, you just drew a connection that I have to point out. So you mentioned Moon. Moon is directed by Duncan Jones, and Duncan Jones is the son of David Bowie, who has a song in this movie.
Nice.
Starman.
Good pull.
in this movie. Well, it's such a big moment for me. I wanted to talk about David Bowie and like what he means for space, because like the guy was clearly from outer space, and like he's the coolest person to ever live. And having
the true Martian.
having that song in this movie, I don't know. So it was such a cool moment for me because I love Bowie. I don't know. It was just awesome to do that. And then you made the connection, so I had to call it out.
Good pull. So before you get into the plot, just make sure you stick around to the very end of this episode. We're going to reveal our next project, what it's going to be. We're excited because it's going to be a patron paid for exclusively project from one of our high tier options. It's gonna be our first time doing one of those. So stick around and we'll reveal at the very end of the episode.
All right, getting into plot here. I'm going to do this in 3 parts, and we're going to start with, in 2035, the crew of the Ares 3 mission to Mars are exploring when a strong dust storm threatens to topple their Mars ascent vehicle, forcing them to abort the mission. Mark Watney is struck by debris and lost in the storm. Watney is believed dead. Commander Lewis orders the crew to take off and rejoin the Hermes. Watney awakens after the storm to a low oxygen warning and returns to the crew's surface habitat. Doing self-surgery, he removes from his abdomen the debris that destroyed his biomonitor. Lacking communications with Earth, his only chance of rescue is the Ares 4, landing 2,000 miles away at Schiaparelli Crater. Being a botanist, he improvises a farm inside the hab using Martian soil fertilized with human feces. After NASA holds a funeral for Watney, satellite planner Mindy Park reviews images of the hab area and realizes he has survived. NASA Administrator Teddy Sanders has the news released but doesn't tell the crew of the Hermes. Watney takes the rover to retrieve the nearby Pathfinder probe, which fell silent in 1997. Using Pathfinder's camera and its motor, he establishes rudimentary two-way communications with Earth, first using simple signs, then sending and receiving ASCII in hexadecimal.
I think is that ASCII?
ASCII?
Yeah. I don't know if it's pronounced that way, but I feel like it is.
NASA sends a software patch to link the rover with Pathfinder and communicate via text. Watney becomes angry when he learns that the crew has not been told of his survival, and Sanders reluctantly lets Henderson finally inform him.
I definitely want to jump back a little bit and say the decision to start with the mission as a whole instead of what we get in the book where we start with Watney already, like we get his first log entry. It's the first chapter of the book. I think it was a great decision. I think it was the obvious one to make. I think it was a very cinematic thing to start with, which is a great hook, right?
Right.
And then I love the way the storm looked. It looked very dangerous. It was very dark, and there was something really cool about the scenes of them walking through the darkness with their their helmet lights. Mm-hmm. Very Alien, honestly. It reminded me of that. It was like a throwback to one of his own movies.
So the suits were there were suits that had been NASA had been developing. Really didn't like them, so he went with more of a Prometheus style. Because he had been doing it, I think Prometheus was 2012 or 2013.
Oh, yeah.
And so he kind of went with a suit that was similar to like the Prometheus look.
Yeah, but these, honestly, I think these are some of the best looking suits I've seen from any of his movies. I really like these suits.
Me too. They're cool.
Because I think he really tried to make them look like something that we would actually use.
Yeah.
It wasn't just pure science fiction suit. It was
Right.
like, okay, I'm going to be a little bit fun with this, but I want to make it look like
Practical.
something we would really make
Yeah.
in NASA.
Right.
So because of that, I think that like kind of grounds it in a way that I really liked. Oh, so the the self-surgery scene is pretty gruesome, and that's always something that is always striking about this movie whenever I watch it. It's like a cringy scene, and it's also like, we talked about that survival genre. The more I think about it, the more I think like that's kind of a staple of the survival genre, right? Like suffering some sort of injury and having to deal with it on your own. And you, whether it's some sort of self-surgery or some sort of self treatment, and it's always like some fairly gruesome thing where you think like, I would have died there, I wouldn't have been able to do that, and like they kind of like show that the person you're watching is not made of your like usual stuff, right? Because they're able to do this thing.
I mean, the first thing we get is like he comes in and like obviously he can't take his clothes off unless he cuts them off without pulling that thing out, and he just yanks that thing out. I'm like, I feel like that was not advisable. I feel like that's not the way.
Well, but he had to.
No, he had
to
to
get the suit off.
But it's just like, I mean, what kind of like I think pulling stuff out historically hasn't been great for people, right? It's like if you get stabbed by
right.
something.
If you're like gonna be able to go to a hospital, you want to have the doctor do that.
Right.
Absolutely. Like you don't want to do that on your own. You always want to leave it in because you'll that's like very good way to bleed out is to pull out whatever's stuck in you, and that is something that's a big problem because a lot of people see it in films and think, oh, I got something sticking out of my arm, I need to yank it out.
Yeah.
When really you need to leave it there until you get to a hospital. But he didn't have that option, obviously. He had to do it himself. He had to be able to take his suit off to see with the wound and get to it and treat it. And like, so the only way to get your suit off is you have to get that thing out of there first.
Right.
So yeah. And then I loved the part where he extracts the piece and then he holds it up to the end of it to make sure it like fit.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's classic. I feel like I've seen that in other movies, but it's a good one. It's a good thing. I like it.
Yeah, it's cool.
Pathfinder. So I was reading another article after our last episode that was breaking down the science in the movie. And one of the things that it was like a I fucking love science page did a breakdown when the movie came out originally of a lot of the science in the movie. And one of the things that was asked was, is what he does with Pathfinder possible? And their verdict was yes. They think that they talked to some of the guys who worked on Pathfinder, and they said that if you were able to provide power to it, there's no reason in their mind that it wouldn't be able to send signals.
That's crazy.
So that's totally legit that he could have done that.
That's wild.
The design of the hab, this is another thing from that article, is very theoretical because they obviously haven't figured out the designs. And one of the things they think now is that it would actually be partially, if not mostly, underground because radiation is such a huge problem because of the lack of a sufficient ozone. Especially in space travel, but then even on Mars. And so they think that the hab would have probably been more of an underground structure and less of a sort of inflatable tent on the surface.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because like, I know that they want to do it as lightweight as possible, but that canvas, like repeatedly, you're like, God, this feels so sketchy.
Yeah.
So a couple of things with that. How about the decision to have the storm just constantly raging outside, like a day in and like every night, basically?
Yeah, there's a lot of winds whipping around. Now, it's interesting because I was reading about it, trying to understand it, and I guess it's not really, I don't know, we were describing this like thickness of the atmosphere and stuff, and that's not really what it is. It also has to do with pressure, and it's a very low pressure surface, and so it's weird because you can get 100-mile-an-hour sandstorms on Mars, but because of the low pressure, it would only feel like about a 10-mile-an-hour sandstorm.
Right.
Is what I was reading. So it's weird how that works. So it's like it's both accurate and inaccurate at the same time. One thing I did read is that Mars Curiosity rover has actually caught images of dust devils on the surface of Mars. Mm-hmm. So like that's totally legit that there would be those like dust devils. And now they said that like maybe they wouldn't look quite so dramatic as they do on screen, but you never know. Also, I mean, we're learning crazy new shit about Mars all the time.
Right. Yeah, I love it, dude. Okay, so this brings us to something kind of weird, and you'll have to tell me if we want to cut this or not, but I thought this was interesting to be in a Ridley Scott movie.
Okay.
And just, I want to bring a light to the fact that, again, this is Obama's favorite movie of 2015. Just this line being in here, not being cut, is very interesting to me. So there's a moment when they're telling him to watch his language, right? He gets pissed, and he's like, what the fuck are you guys doing?
Oh, I know what you're going to talk about.
Yeah, so he's like, what the fuck are you guys doing? And they're like, watch your language. And then he messages back, and then they talk about something called felching. And I was unfamiliar. I did not know what that was.
I was as well, and I looked it up.
And they were like, don't Google it, don't look it up. And I was like, I got to do it, guys. I got to figure out what's going on. So I'm just going to say for the listeners, this is explicit. Just click that little 15-second skip button if you need to. So felching is a sexual practice involving the act of orally sucking semen out of the anus of one's partner.
Yeah, that's what it is. All right. When I looked it up, I saw that as well. That's funny. I totally went over my head when I saw it in the theaters because I didn't know what it was, and it was just like, oh, something explicit. But yeah, I don't know. That's kind of awesome that Watney throws that at them.
It's wild, and it's like clearly, like you said, it goes over the head of most people who watch it, and then it's like not until home release are you like, oh, maybe I will just Google this real quick, and then you Google it, and you're like, whoa, Jesus, wasn't expecting that. Okay, so jumping back into plot here. Henderson and Jet Propulsion Laboratory director prepare an Iris space probe to deliver enough food to Watney until Ares 4 arrives. Meanwhile, the Hab's airlock malfunctions due to a small puncture, destroying Watney's crops. Sanders orders the team to skip the usual safety inspections to launch the probe sooner, but it fails 40 seconds after liftoff. Watney now feels his death is inevitable.
Oh man, the scene of the ice coming in and flash freezing the crops is so cool, and that explosion we talked about in the last episode, I thought it was going to be really cool in the movie, and it was. The way it flips like end over end, and it's such a dark moment. Like it's so oh my god moment. Like how's he going to ever get out of this? Just had to call that out. I love that scene.
And it also like it leads to him taking this Hab canvas and duct taping it on, and latching it down and stuff. And like again, those storms were like pretty wild in this movie. And then he takes his his spacesuit off when he's in the Hab after it's been taped up and stuff. And the entire time I'm just thinking like that Hab canvas is the worst thing ever. Like it's like any rock flies, anything like that touches that canvas. Yeah.
And they did a good job of showing that.
Yeah. And I know like rocks couldn't fly in Mars. Like they were saying like large rocks couldn't fly because the winds, wouldn't get high enough. But within the context of this movie, they can.
Yeah.
So it's like,
yes,
really fucking scary when that thing's like flapping back and forth. And I think Matt Damon's reaction is.
Tell me if this is actually an added scene, but I believe there's a scene in this version where he is like gluing a bunch of holes with a glue, like a big glue gun looking thing. And when I saw it, I thought, I don't think that was in the original cut, but to me, it like sells this fix that he did a little more as being a little bit less of like, because I remember some people who thought that was like huge bullshit. They're like, oh, I can't believe he did that. He would never do it that way.
Well, it's like he also put the Hab canvas over top of the rocket as it launched, and it, like so.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, that scene is added for the extended edition.
Yeah, and I think it sells it a little better, honestly.
Yeah,
there's a few things like that, like him doing just a little bit more in relation to like certain things he's doing. And then just because we're moving past it fast, I do want to shout out the potato farm and how they visualized that. It just looked so cool on screen. Right. I don't know. I really liked the way it looked. It didn't look the way I pictured it in the book, but it looked better. Right. It looked like, okay, this is how it would actually look. Yeah, is what I kept thinking.
It's cool. They built 20 sets on sound stages for this movie, which isn't a ton for a movie like this. Like normally you would expect a little more than that. And so they actually, in some of the sets, they actually built like working potato farms, from what I understand, or at least had actual potato plants in some of the sets.
Wow.
So moving on, the China National Space Administration has been developing a powerful classified booster rocket. Feeling camaraderie with NASA scientists, they offer it to repeat the Iris mission. As Watney is still at more risk the longer he waits, JPL astrodynamicist Rich Parnell devises an alternate plan, sending the rocket with supplies to Hermes, which will use Earth's gravity to slingshot back to Mars 2 years earlier. Sanders rejects the idea, refusing to risk the crew of the Hermes, but Henderson surreptitiously sends them Purnell's plans. Risking their lives and careers, they vote unanimously for it and make the decision necessary to change course. Powerless to stop them, NASA concedes the issue.
So one thing I gotta shout out is something that struck me as cheesy when I saw it the first time and didn't really improve in subsequent viewings, is there's a huge space movie cliche, and I feel like every space movie does it, and this movie does it like 3 or 4 times, where we're gonna grab a couple random items and we're going to play out what an orbit looks like. And it's going to be like, this represents this, and this represents this. And it's very clearly for the audience. But when you start thinking about how ridiculous it is for these characters to be doing this, because they all know exactly what is being shown.
Right.
Like, it's very rudimentary. And they're all like, literally, they're like physicists and shit who are like sitting there being told how this is going to look. I don't know. And it's always like, it's so dumbed down. And like I said, I know why they do it. Like, I know it's communicating to the audience, but I feel like there has to be better ways to visualize this than this, like, constantly going back to the idea of picking up, 2 salt shakers and, or whatever, and doing it that way. And then, Interstellar does it with the whole folding a piece of paper and putting a pencil through. Like, that's the other big one that you always see, for wormholes. I feel like every space movie is going to have one of those too.
Well, and that's the thing is like, it's like, so you go into a situation making a movie like this, you're like, and I think that's another thing I wanted to touch on is that, like, we said before, like the movie was made to be more broadly appealing. So like, you want it to be broadly appealing, you want it to be successful to the lowest common person. So like, if they don't understand it, then they're going to check out.
I just wish they had thought of a better way, because to me, it's like a way that can serve the characters a little better, because to me, was Rich Purnell, Donald Glover's character, is this brilliant mind who can't even like interact with people in a normal way. And yet he's going to do this like very rudimentary, demonstration of what he's talking about. No, that guy's just going to talk, around you in circles, and you're not going to know what the hell he's talking about. And maybe you got to see it on a screen or something, or some, somebody else explains it in a way to make sense of it. But it just didn't feel right for the character. And even though you do get that really funny moment where he doesn't know who the director of NASA is, which gets a huge laugh every time. I love that. Funny. Who are you? And he's like, Teddy, I'm the director of NASA. That's so good. But then I think there's even a moment where they like snap a pen on Kristen Wiig's head, which was really weird.
Yeah.
Like, I know we're not supposed to like Kristen Wiig in this movie, but that seemed a bit over the line.
Yeah. Agreed. I would like to see them do away with that kind of stuff, but unfortunately, I don't see it happening anytime soon, because I think what the idea behind it is, do you want to look at a screen that's going to explain it to you, which some movies do, or do you want to look at actors who are giving a performance? But I do agree that it undermines the characters, obviously, because
it's definitely a problem. It's definitely. I'm not saying it's easy, but I also don't believe that there's not another way you can do it.
Yeah,
I don't believe it.
I agree. Yeah, I'm sure that somebody will figure it out.
Because to me, those scenes drag the movie down. They always do whenever I see them. The other thing you could do, to harp on it one more second longer, is remember that the people who are seeing this movie, 95% of them have seen that scene in another movie. So rely on the fact that they probably know it, especially like the wormhole scene. Like, we've all seen the folded paper, pencil through we've all seen that now. You don't need to tell
If you just say slingshot in a space movie, people know what you're talking about. Just be like, yeah, we're going to do a slingshot move.
Yeah. I think it's like, I don't know, respect the intelligence of your audience a little bit more, maybe. I don't know.
All right, so this last bit of plot here. Watney begins the 90s soul journey to...
Real quick, I got to interrupt you because we're about to move away from it. But when he's in the hab, he has the Curiosity rover driving around in the background of scenes, and it looks like it's just kind of like doing its own thing. I absolutely love that. It just seems like it's his dog, which I think is like the coolest thing, that like, you're the Martian, you're on Mars, you're the sole person on this planet, and you've like resurrected this deceased rover, and now it's just driving around in your hab like a little dog for you. I think it's just really cool.
Yeah, that was cool. It's a cool little addition. I guess while we're here, I did want to mention one other like cool little production thing. The original cover page of the draft of a script was aboard an actual NASA ship Orion when it launched. On the cover was a drawing of Matt Damon's character on Mars saying, "I'm going to science the shit out of this planet." So that's a cool little thing that, I mean, that's obviously showing like NASA was invested in this story in this movie.
Well, they had to know it was going to be a great recruitment tool for them, and rightfully it should be, like, hell yeah, go sign up for NASA.
Right.
I'm behind that.
All right. So this last little bit of plot here is, Watney begins the 90 soul journey to Schiaparelli, where the MAV for Ares 4 has been pre-positioned, but it needs to be lightened to make the rendezvous with Hermes on its new course. Watney must remove many components and replace the nose cone with pieces of the Hab's canvas. The MAV still fails to reach the required speed, so Commander Lewis maneuvers Hermes, consuming most of its available fuel, then ordering a directional explosive decompression of the internal atmosphere. Finally, she uses a manned maneuvering unit, but still cannot quite reach Watney. He pierces the glove of his suit and uses the escaping air to propel himself towards Lewis, effectively reuniting him with his crew after 560 souls alone on Mars. After returning to Earth, Watney becomes a survival instructor for astronaut candidates. 5 years later, on the anniversary of Ares 5 mission launch, those involved in Watney's rescue have begun new lives.
So Captain Blondebeard, his reign is over on Mars. He's back on Earth. Yeah, I mean, we see a lot of changes here at the end, right, from the book. So I definitely want to hear your reaction to some of those. But just before I move on from this in my notes, I think this overall story is just a clinic on how to keep your pace moving and keep reader interest. And obviously it works in a movie too, by having just things constantly going wrong. And the frequency in which something goes wrong is like really well paced. It's really well spaced out in such a way, to where it feels like it never really gets to, you never get a moment where you're like, okay, everything's going to be okay. Like, I don't know, or it's a very short-lived moment before something else goes wrong, and something else goes wrong.
Well, I'm always a fan of like the idea of bringing a character, like you take them to the brink, like you start off in a certain position, you start off at like a neutral area, and then you take them to where it's like they are going to fail, nothing can go right, it's all over, there's nothing else that can be done.
Call that black moment. Yeah.
Right. So in that black moment. And then, which is, you know, he loses everything. The resupply mission fails. Everything's like, there's no way he's going to make it. And then that makes the triumph so much better. You know, the climax.
We'll have to see characters push past that. Yeah. And just the cascading of shit going wrong. I think like if you're ever wondering like what to do in your fiction to make something more exciting, make something go wrong. It really works well. So just to get back to that. So I have a lot of thoughts about the changes they did to the ending here, but I wanted to hear what you thought of it. I know we talked a little bit about the Iron Man thing, and how it was a reference in the book, but then he doesn't end up doing it in the book. And in the movie, we actually see him doing it, and then we get this big kind of tethered moment where Lewis goes out herself to catch Watney. How did that all play for you in the movie?
Okay, so a couple of things. Really, I'm of two minds. I think that making the ending more cinematic and having the Iron Man moment works for the movie because, like we've talked about before, what they're trying to do with this movie is make it more broadly appealing. And having like a huge moment like that where like people are off like untethered and flying around is like the most like anxiety-inducing thing you can do in a space movie is have somebody not tethered and they're flying around. And so I think it works cinematically. I think that works really well. In terms of the story,
real quick, we got an unnecessary one of those with the Winter Soldier hopping around untethered for no real reason that I could discern.
Yeah,
on the outside of the
Well, my thing is like he was for whatever reason he needed to do it really quickly, and I didn't understand the urgency.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I didn't get that. It felt like an unnecessary moment of let's inject some drama by not having him be tethered. Yeah, which seemed ridiculous.
Well, and I know that those like the little mobile unit things that Commander Lewis puts on to go out and get him. For some reason, I when I was watching the film, I had assumed that they had like because it's the future, it's like a condensed, smaller version that's just built into each spacesuit now. So I was like, oh, okay, if he lets go, then he'll be able to use like little jet propulsion stuff to get him back. But then she puts that thing on her back, and like retroactively, I was like, holy shit! Like if he missed like any handholds, he was gone.
Yeah, no, he just was jumping from like beam to beam in a movie. It was like moving and no reason that I could discern.
Yeah, tension. Okay, so but in terms of like the ending of the story, I prefer the book where it's like it seems because it's like more true to the story, right? It's like these things like plausibly what's going to happen.
Well, the big dramatic moment is the launch and the bomb and the you know what I mean? Like that's all the big dramatic moment, and they kind of took that and they wanted to put a cherry on top with the Iron Man moment. and the end of the tether, Lewis out there on her own. So that's another big thing. Like in the book, she doesn't go herself to do this because she's the commander. She stays on board and she sends one of her subordinates to do it. Like you should, and if you're a commander, usually, right?
Yeah. But I don't know. I did like give Jessica Chastain some more to do. Like I was cool with that.
Yeah, I can see that. I guess it just, I don't know. It's one of those things. Whenever you get a movie or a story that is like so realistic, I feel like it invites you to treat it with that kind of critical eye of like, how realistic is this part, right? Because so much of the movie is so realistic.
Yeah.
I don't know, and I think they were trying to do something symbolic with the the line and the way they kind of get wrapped up in it. To me, it kept feeling very like umbilical.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it was like if the ship represented humanity and like this sort of like taking in of the prodigal son, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It felt like they were trying to say something symbolically with that.
I can see that.
Did you get any of that? Do you have any thoughts on that?
So this is pretty funny. I don't even know if you remember this anymore, but we saw Wrinkle in Time together. Mm-hmm. Remember the ending to Wrinkle in Time where like there's this like weird, she's like jumping and there's like weird like flowing space stuff all around her. It's the very, very end.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's like lights and stuff.
And she's like moving in slow motion and stuff. For some reason, that is why like I shot over to that when it was all wrapped around them and everything. But in terms of it being like representative of something, I could see like it being, yeah. I mean, not only did it make for a cool shot with like it all like spooled out all around them and stuff, and then obviously you're like, well, they're gonna get all like, tethered, like they're gonna be all tangled up, and yeah, they're not gonna be able to effectively move back to the ship.
I thought it was a bit schmaltzy, honestly. Like it just was all, I don't know. The whole end of this movie gets a little bit too sentimental in certain ways.
I mean, yeah, I agree. So like, since we're talking about that, let's just jump to that epilogue thing.
Yeah.
How do you feel about this in terms of, so the book ends with him on the ship, back on the Hermes, on the way back to Earth. Yeah. And here we get
no Earth scene.
Yeah. So how do you feel about that though? The epilogue?
So I would have liked, honestly, there's just one big thing I don't like about it. I don't know. His speech he gives to the students is not a great one, in my opinion. Especially when he starts talking about how, like, at some point, everything's going to go south on you, and you think you're going to die, and you have to... I was like, okay, this sounds like the kind of speech that a commander gives someone who's about to go into battle. It doesn't really feel like a NASA speech to me, because... I don't know if like on every mission there's a point in which every astronaut's going to think they're going to die.
Right.
Like I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but like I just don't, it doesn't feel like that's a super frequent thing to happen. Like, yeah, you got to be prepared for it, but to sit there and say like it's going to happen to every single one of you, I don't know.
I guess I also understand like the idea that NASA does have an idea of being like plan for everything going wrong. So like the idea that they should be,
but that's a little different than what he was saying. But even if I grant that part of it was okay, I think the like, does anyone have any questions? And then everybody's hand shoots up. It was just a little cheesy. Mm-hmm. I don't know, man. The part of the Earth stuff I really liked though was him sitting on the bench and looking down and seeing the plant and like greeting it the same way he did his plant when he first grew one, his potato plant. And then seeing them all like jogging by even, and like the respect that they clearly had for him, like that could have been it. And I would have liked that scene as the final scene, honestly. Mm-hmm. I liked that scene a lot. So yeah, it's like a smaller, quieter scene, but I think it conveys a lot of what you're wanting to convey.
Yeah. I think that, okay, so for me, what I would just cut the whole epilogue personally. I would rather just see them on the ship and know that they're going to get home and just, think about the rest of their lives on my own. But I don't know, I kind of am into those kind of endings more than these like really nice bow tied up ones. Well,
we also see all the, tell me what you think of those scenes for sure, but we should also touch on the sort of montage we get during the credits.
Right. We get to see like everybody's like two of them have started a family. One of them is going back up, which is like showing that like, the space program continues and like because Watney was brought home. And yeah, I mean, I like what it was trying to do. I like it, but I prefer just like get him back on the ship and he's on the way back home. But like you said, I think if you were going to leave anything, just have him touch the plant and be like respected by those other people, and then you can infer that he's going to be like some sort of professor or something.
Yeah, like if one of them says like, Professor Watney or something, like
Yeah.
says when they're saying hi to him or something, you can imply that that's about to happen or that is happening. And that's one of those moments where what's left unsaid is going to be so much more powerful, in my opinion, than what we end up seeing. I don't know. Maybe we're all being like curmudgeons about it, but I remember a lot of people I talked to after we saw the movie, the people I knew, all thought that final scene was like kind of cheesy.
Yeah.
They could have done without. Oh, they also say day one, like it pops up day one, like it's a whole new mission and all that stuff. Like they do a lot to make it cheesy. Honestly, it's it's given too much.
And yeah, it's like day one, and at first you're like, day one back on Earth, bullshit. He wouldn't look like that day one back on Earth, and then you have to like figure out, oh, day one at this new job. Oh,
I guess. Yeah, I don't know. Kind of weird.
But yeah, I have a couple other little things here. Do you remember or do you know about any of the Golden Globe stuff that went on with The Martian? There was like a bit of controversy.
No.
So
oh wait, yeah. So let me see if I can remember. It was nominated as a comedy.
Right. Not only nominated, but it won Best Picture in a comedy or musical. How do you feel about that? Hey, the movie's funny, but is it a comedy or musical?
The movie's funny, but it's not a comedy.
It's a drama, clearly, right?
It's a drama.
It's a sci-fi drama. So
dramedy, clearly, but leans heavily I would say it leans way more heavily into drama than it does comedy.
Yeah. Damon won Best Actor in a comedy or musical.
Okay, well there you go.
Yeah, and then
he was good, but once again, not really a comedy, but okay.
And then the film was nominated for 7 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Actor, Best Adapted Screenplay, among others.
Okay, I didn't know it was that lauded in the awards realm.
It did really well.
Which I feel like take it or leave it.
Oh yeah, as far as like awards go, like Golden Globes clearly like they've nominated. It was a comedy, so take that to mean what you will about that award show. I mean, they've gotten a little better and stuff, and I think that in response to this happening, they've kind of changed some of the rules. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, I like to tell people that like I like to say like these things won these things because people can like immediately know what that means to them, but awards don't mean anything.
Yeah. Not really. And the awards are weird in any art form. We talk about this all the time in writing. It's like there's a certain kind of book that will get nominated for awards that isn't always the same kind of book that's going to be a bestseller.
Right.
And so a lot of times it will depend on what kind of writer you are and what your goals are. Because if you're trying to write a bestseller versus if you're trying to write a critically acclaimed novel versus if you're trying to write a novel that's going to win awards, those sometimes are all different things. Mm-hmm. Now, sometimes you can get lucky and kind of get all of them, but it's very rare, honestly. Yeah. It's a kind of a rare thing.
Well, and I mean, with film in general, the people who are voting, it's like, a majority of them don't watch everything that's been nominated. So, like, are they truly like the best source of who could be? Things kind of get snowballing effects and like win, and so ultimately, like, take the awards with a grain of salt. I think always.
So one thing I wanted to point out that we didn't really talk about much, but one of the things that I really respect about astronauts is the danger. There's an immense amount of danger that comes along with being in space in a lot of ways, but in particular, the amount of radiation you're exposed to is like the cancer levels in later life in astronauts are astronomically high. And so you go into space knowing you're signing up for, you're probably going to have cancer when you get back, if you survive this. Mm-hmm. And at some point in your life. And from what I understand, Mark Watney's would be like, it would be a virtual lock that he would get cancer because of how much radiation he would have been exposed to.
I mean, not to mention the isotope as well.
Yeah. And then also the length of the space travel. That's one of the biggest barriers to a trip to Mars is the length of time you're on the ship. Mm-hmm. Now, since this is science fiction, I can try and be gracious and say maybe we figured out some sort of shielding, you know what I mean, to help with this. But that feels very hand wavy to me, and this is a movie that isn't hand wavy. So I think it's also the idea that you are you're signing up for that, and that's what a lot of astronauts are doing these days. They're basically saying that they're okay with that. And it's worth it for them to be in space. And the longer you're in space, the more of a risk it is. So whenever you hear about somebody coming back who's been on the space station for however long, and it's like the longest time someone's been on the space station, they have all kinds of health problems when they get back.
Mm-hmm. Didn't they do? They did studies on. There's a guy who was like a twin, went up
Yeah.
and he's come back, and it like altered his DNA in ways.
Sure. Yeah, because he was in zero gravity, which is another whole thing where that will like really dramatically affect your bones and all kinds of stuff. Yeah, the amount of time in zero gravity is another huge problem. But yeah, I don't know. I just wanted to shout it out because I think it's admirable to me that people are willing to sacrifice in that way, and and that I don't think we maybe recognize that enough.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's always been that way too. Like from the early days, like those guys were going up in rickety rockets that.
Well, and before that, they didn't know. They were like, "Who?" They didn't, like a lot of that shit. It was like, we don't know what it's going to do.
Right.
You're just like, you're kind of like, yeah, they did some early testing with different animals and stuff that they sent up, but like for the most part, they didn't really know what it was going to do when we got up there.
I mean, just imagine trying to be the first person. Like you don't know if you're coming back. If you make it through the atmosphere, you don't know for sure that you're making it back. So
one crazy thing I read about, they didn't know there was a real fear. They thought that there was a risk of if you floated out to the center of a room you were in, that you wouldn't be able to get back, that you would be stuck there.
Right.
They really were worried about this being a real possibility. And what they found is that the swimming through air gives you enough propulsion to where you can actually kind of swim around anywhere you need to go.
Mm-hmm.
But they were worried, like that was a real worry, and they didn't know. When they went up there, like, be careful about being out in the middle of nowhere. You might not be able to ever get to the site again.
Yeah,
you might just be stuck. It's terrifying.
But that's what, and they're willing to sign up for it because it was,
yeah,
they were willing to die for it. Basically, everybody. I think we can safely say that every astronaut knows that there's a potential, and they know in the immediate future, and also like you say, like later effects.
All right, so before we leave The Martian, which was our first real hard sci-fi, I just wanted to like get your kind of, now that we've gone through the whole process and we can look back at it, what your thoughts were about covering something that is so steeped in science and real math and all that, and the movie like is to an extent too, and so I think it all kind of comes together. And we've talked about how much we admire the space program, but as a project for the podcast, like how do you feel about it?
I mean, I think it was really cool. I think it like we got to scratch an itch that I've had for a little while in terms of like I talked about on the other episode how like I wanted to. Sometimes I like miss doing some hard math or science, and not that I actually did any of this calculation, but I feel like I was able to live vicariously through Mark.
You were in the room with someone who was doing it, right? Basically, yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think it was fun. I think the cool thing about this podcast is that we can really cover every type of genre and get that's what I want. It's like tons of different perspectives and experiences, and I think this was another good one.
Yeah, and for listeners, if you enjoyed this kind of thing, definitely let us know with suggestions on any other hard sci-fi movies that have been made from novels that we could potentially do. Because I would love to go back to this. And I've heard some rumors about certain Arthur C. Clarke novels that I think were rumored to be in production. So we might get some more stuff on the horizon here. I also did some more research into what qualifies as hard sci-fi after we talked last time, and it seems like it's actually a kind of a broader line than I thought it was. Like I've seen people call Arrival hard sci-fi. I've seen people call just lots of stuff. Like it depends on how like it's just like a lot of genres. It's very kind of
subjective.
It's very subjective. Thank you. Yeah, it's there's not like really fixed borders on these things. So I'm sure we'll get back into some of that stuff. But we do have an exciting project coming up, which we're gonna reveal at the very end of the episode. So make sure to stick around for that because I don't know, I'm excited about it, and it's gonna be our first time doing one that was paid for by a patron.
Yeah, if you wanted to follow us on social media, we're on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. All of those at Ink2Film, and we also have a Facebook group called the Council of Inklings, which is great because we post polls in there and interact with everybody in the council and send out kind of news of upcoming projects potentially. So yeah, check that out if you're interested. Yeah,
we'd love to have you there. We also have a Gmail account, ink2film@gmail.com. If you wanted to send us any feedback, if you wanted to send us any suggestions, or just your reactions to this book or movie, we'd love to hear from you.
Also, if you could leave us a rating or review on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts, we would really appreciate that. We hit 50 this past year, and we're hoping to hit 100.
Yeah, I mean, we've kind of had a drought here for a little while. I think it's been a few months since we've gotten a new one, or at least a month. So we'd love to get some new reviews. That would be awesome. So Yeah, every time one gets posted in there, I definitely see it. Sometimes I share them to our Instagram account or our Twitter account. So it's a good way to just kind of like broadcast your appreciation for the show. And we definitely greatly appreciate that. And we also wanted to thank Ross Bugden for the use of our intro and outro music.
Okay, it's time to announce our next project for February.
Yep. So we are going to do Silver Linings Playbook, which is a movie/book that I know very little about, other than a little bit about the premise. But I have never read it, and I've never seen it. How about you?
You know, this would be an interesting little exercise here. So I've seen the movie. I'm a fan of the movie. Just I wonder what, like, through cultural osmosis, do you know about it at all, if anything?
I know it's about mental illness, and and Bradley Cooper's in it, and that's about it.
Well, then there you go. I mean, you're going in really fresh.
I'm going in blind, man. Pretty blind. I think I saw the trailer when it originally came out, so I'm sure there's more of it I know I've just forgotten.
Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of Bradley Cooper, by the way, I just watched Star is Born this weekend for the first time. Did you see that?
Yeah. Yeah, I watched it fairly recently too.
Yeah, it was good. And it was funny because the whole time I was turning to the people I was with who had seen it before, and I was like, "Is he doing a Sam Elliott impression?" And she was like, "Actually, Sam Elliott plays his brother, and he wanted to make his voice sound like him." And I was like, "He sounds like he's doing a Sam Elliott impression."
Yeah.
Which I like the movie.
Yeah, I like the movie. It was interesting because, like, I was not on board until like halfway through the movie. Like, I was not having it. I felt very by the book and very like generic until like halfway through, and then I started to click into like actually enjoying it. And then the last bit is just unbelievable, so good.
Yeah, there's some great music in that movie for sure. So if you're just a fan of music and you're a fan of Lady Gaga at all, it's great for that reason. And Bradley Cooper can sing. I was impressed with him. But yeah, anyway, that's a different movie. We're doing Silver Linings Playbook, but Bradley Cooper's in it, so it'll be cool to kind of revisit him and see him playing I assume a very different kind of role. So I'm excited for that.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, and if you wanted to learn how to become a patron, go to patreon.com/InkToFilm, and we'll have all our different tiers on there. Now, the tier that you have to do is our Jukebox Hero level, which is $25 a month, which is a lot. But we were always told when we were starting up with this podcast, don't underestimate people's generosity. So we decided to include this like premium tier. And if you're willing to be that generous and really help the show that much, we thought we're going to do episodes for you then. So we're doing 2 episodes on this project that was bought and paid for by Stephen E. And his generosity. So big shout out to him. Thank you. And we'll definitely shout him out on those episodes. But if you wanted to learn anything about that or our lower tiers and like what kind of stuff we're offering for that and bonus episodes, all that, definitely check us out.
Yeah, and just one other thing about that is basically like if there's a project that you would like to see us do, that's like basically the best way to kind of force our hand, and you can see the list and kind of see like what you would love to hear us cover. And if it's not on that list, just let us know.
All right, so we hope you'll stick around and come back next week and hear Silver Linings Playbook. But until then,
thanks for listening.